Hi, my name is Alyssa Trautman. I'm a registered dietitian, and today I'll be talking to you about the health effect of sodium in our diet. First, let's talk about some statistics of cardiovascular disease, a major health problem in the U.S. The American Heart Association estimates 92.1 million Americans are affected by some form of cardiovascular disease. Heart disease being the leading cause of death in the U.S., 1 every 40 seconds, which is more than all forms of cancer and respiratory disease combined. It's not just a national issue, but also a global issue. Global estimation healthcare cost is $863 billion and is expected to increase to $1 trillion by the year 2030. While some risk factors for cardiovascular disease include smoking, physical inactivity, heart conditions, diabetes, diet is a major contributor. Studies show that there's been some improvement to the American diet as far as increased whole grain consumption, reduced amount of sugar consumption, but there's been virtually no progress in our target towards sodium. And while the body uses some sodium for its daily processes, the overabundance in our diet is resulting in some negative health effects. Sodium causes us to retain fluid, which increases our blood volume, puts more burden on the heart, and raises our blood pressure. And we know high blood pressure is the #1 cause of heart disease and stroke. Every 5 years, the dietary guidelines for Americans review and update their recommendations. So the 2015-2020 guidelines recommend 2,300 milligrams of sodium a day. And as a visual, you can see that's 1 teaspoon of salt. But the guideline is actually reduced for many Americans, including any children, anyone over 51 years or older, anybody with a history of diabetes, heart disease, or kidney disease, and African Americans, where the recommendation is only 1,500 milligrams. And as a comparison, the daily average intake for most Americans is 3,400 milligrams, double what most people should be getting. And while most people feel like they're doing a good enough job by not adding any salt to their food, it's important to remember that at least 75% of our sodium intake comes from processed foods. That is what the manufacturer has already added to the food before we buy and before we consume it. We cannot do anything to reduce or eliminate the amount of manufacturer added sodium. So a new study just showed the top 10 foods highest in sodium that Americans consume the most, and topping the list was breads, which is surprising to most people as bread doesn't have a salty taste, but it's really underestimated how much sodium is added by manufacturers for either flavor enhancement or for preservative. You can see number 2 is pizza, which is a combination of many high sodium foods, including the bread crust, tomato sauce, which is typically canned, cheese, which is high in sodium, and depending on your toppings, pepperoni, sausage, olives could be really high in sodium. Sandwiches, deli meats, soups, burritos, chips, chicken, cheese, and eggs all make the list. And many people are surprised to see chicken, as it's generally considered a healthy food, but they don't realize that manufacturers typically inject sodium and even pork with a sodium broth, also called a saline, before they ship to the stores. So you can always look on the front of your package, and the front will list if it's been injected with any how much sodium broth. One of the most surprisingly high sources of salt in our diet is sports drinks. You can see that any kind of sports drink will have sodium added to it. Other beverages that are high in sodium include hot cocoa mix, diet soda, and milk. So what can we do to reduce the amount of sodium we eat? The first is to try to limit processed foods as much as possible. Choose fresh and frozen, and if canned items are totally unavoidable, at least rinse them with running water before you eat or consume them. You can also look for claims on the food package like no salt added, reduced sodium, and these will let you know that there's been some steps by the manufacturer to reduce how much salt has been added. You can also try a salt substitute. There's a variety of reduced or light salts, and there's some that are totally sodium free. Make sure you check with the physician before you start a salt substitute, as they contain potassium, which should not be used in combination with certain health conditions. Another thing we can do is increase the potassium in our diet. Potassium is a nutrient that most Americans are lacking in their diet, which is a concern because it can help balance our sodium intake and lower our blood pressure. Potassium is found naturally in many fruits and vegetables. Some of the highest sources are oranges, bananas, tomatoes, potatoes, and beans. So in summary, heart disease is a major problem, not just in America, but globally. And a poor diet, including a diet high in sodium, is a major contributor to this. Consuming foods high in sodium is a struggle, as the manufacturers add a lot of sodium to our food, even if we're not adding much with our salt shaker. The safe upper limit is 2,300 milligrams, and for that certain group of Americans, it's reduced to 1,500 milligrams. So we should all be making it a priority to reduce our sodium intake and increase our potassium intake by consuming lots of natural fruits and vegetables.